Well, welcome to Precious Testimonies. I'm Norm Rasmussen, your host. You're watching the Precious Testimonies broadcast. This is a ministry that is founded on Psalm 96:3, where it reads, "Declare God's glory among the nations." Well, that is what we are endeavoring to do, letting people share how Jesus Christ has powerfully impacted their lives, how Jesus Christ has changed their lives. And so, let's listen now to people sharing exactly that.
For me, the word Jesus was just a curse word. Born again? I had never heard the word born again. I grew up hearing Adolf Hitler was a Christian. I didn't know anything. I grew up Jewish. My mom's a Jew, my dad's a Jew. Went to Shabbat services. We never missed the high holidays. I was bar mitzvahed with Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, Vice President of World Jewish Council. And I remember one time somebody held about a 4 or 5 inch knife to my chest because I was wearing a Star of David. We had a babysitter, and one day the babysitter had us over her house instead of over our house. And I remember coming down her stairs and looking over to the left over the banister at the fireplace, and there was this picture that just caught my eye, and I said, "Wow, who is that?" I heard her answer. It was, "That's the Son of God." And I went home that day and I said, "Mom, guess what I saw today? I saw a picture of the Son of God." And she said, "We don't believe that." My parents divorced when I was 5 years old. I didn't realize how much it devastated me. It just created like a bunch of fissures and brokenness down in my heart. And before long, as I got older, I started to fall into drugs and other kinds of bad behavior. I started to play with marijuana at first. By the time I was near the end of my junior year of high school, I was smoking marijuana every day. And by my freshman year, I started to play with cocaine. I can remember more than once going through paralysis as I went through withdrawal. I mean, my life had just bottomed out. "Greg, why don't you join the Air Force? It'll make a man out of you." And there was this pilot who would come out to my post. I'd be guarding his plane, and he would bring me a cold drink, and he would ask me questions about Judaism. I found his questions to be honoring about my background. And one day he said to me, "Would you like to go to church with me?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir." But I was only being polite to him. I didn't really want to go. But one Sunday night, he came by my room in the barracks, and he says, "Well, you ready to go?" We got there a few minutes late. We're seated way up in the balcony in the back, and this woman who's old enough to be my mother comes up to me and she hugs me. What is going on here? It was like my eyes opened somehow, and I could see this woman loved me. Whatever it is these people have, I can see it's real. And I can see they're getting it from that Bible, and I will read that book, and I will change my life to fit it, and I won't explain it away. And I start reading the New Testament, starting with Matthew. When I read this, I thought, this Jesus is Jewish. He's not Christian. What's Christian? He's Jewish. This is a Jewish book about a Jewish man. I just knew that my life had started over. It felt like somebody took a bucket of light and dumped it on my head. I was such a changed person when the Lord came into my life that the executive commander over me in the Air Force actually sent me for a psychological evaluation because I was grinning all the time. But the psychiatrist came back with the evaluation. He said, "You know what, there's nothing wrong with you. We wish everybody were like you." My family, they were not happy about this. I actually think that they would have preferred that I just stayed a drug addict. I was always proud of my Jewish heritage. I loved it. But I also found that it didn't have any power to keep me from falling into, frankly, drugs and other kinds of illicit behavior. They would prefer that I stay a drug addict than believe in Jesus. Jesus had set me free. One of the happiest moments of my life was when my mom was 82 years old and she accepted the Lord. 4 years later, as my mom was on her deathbed in the hospital, she turned away, she looked straight in front of her, and I heard my mom say this, "Jesus, would you take good care of my son? He's a good man."
I came back down the hill and I said, Mike, all this time, the truth was right in front of our noses. I was born into a Jewish family. Both my mom and my dad came from broken homes. Both of them just had miserable family life, knew very little about parenting. They had terrible examples from their parents. Just shy of my 12th birthday, it was decided that they would send me to a boarding school. That began a 6-year journey of adapting to things that I just was not prepared to adapt to. No parents around, influenced by anything, everything. Eventually got introduced to drugs, and by the time I graduated from prep school, became a very regular drug user. Marijuana became LSD, and LSD became all kinds of amphetamines and pills. Basically, just was looking for the next high, the next party, the next pleasure. Got into Syracuse University. My sophomore year, my buddy came to visit me and he said, last summer I went to California, I had this greatest time, why don't we just quit school? We wound up settling in a small town in southern Oregon. We actually acquired some property, a 20-acre piece of property that had a log house and a cabin. We decided, let's move into the cabin and rent out the house. And we found 4 other hippies looking for a place to live. That went on for a couple months until one day something pretty drastic happened. We got a phone call. They were on their way back and they had a van full of drugs. Their van went off the side of the road. Stuff went flying all over the place. The police arrived, and now all 4 of them were in jail. Police cars were driving, seemed like they were all over where our property was. And so we were introduced to a new thing at that particular time called paranoia. We decided we're going to hitchhike to Mexico. Went to the main crossroad of town. The first car that picked us up was a guy and started telling us about Jesus, talking about scripture verses, and not only was I not interested, I didn't even understand what he was saying. We spent the night that day at this ranch, and the next morning they took us to the coast highway and stuck out our thumbs, and the first car that picked us up was a Christian family. And they started asking us questions about God and whether we believed in Jesus and sharing the gospel with us. A couple hundred miles south, we wind up in Mendocino, and we're standing on the coast highway. A pickup truck pulls about 100 feet away from us. Guy gets out of the passenger side, comes right up to me, and he says, "Do you know that Jesus loves you?" We wound up who knows where. I don't remember what happened, and I think I'm probably glad I don't remember what happened. There were a couple times I thought we were going to get killed. It was pretty bizarre, and we were pretty lost. About 3 weeks later, we made it back up to Oregon. Something inside of me, I had this desire, I want to get a hold of this book, this Bible. So I went into town, and in a drugstore, I saw a Bible, and I brought the Bible and I took it home and opened to the New Testament. Now, it was really important to me that Mike not know what I was doing because I thought he would make fun of me, and so I would go up and I began to read. I was just overwhelmed with the gospel, the story of Jesus. I couldn't stop reading. After, I think, probably 2.5 weeks, I began to read my journal of my trip. And I got to the part where that guy that came up to me outside of Mendocino had asked me to pray. And I remember feeling like I really wanted to do that when he had asked me, and I never did. And so I took a walk, and I walked up behind where our house was, up this kind of hill, and I closed my eyes and I just said, "God, if you're there, if you're real, I want to know." I opened my eyes and I just knew. I knew God was real. I came back down the hill. Mike was there. I said, Mike, all this time, the truth was right in front of our noses. And he said, yeah, I know. We started talking, and it turns out the daughter of the realtor was a Christian woman, and she had given Mike a Bible. He was reading it and hiding it from me at the same time that I was reading the one I got and hiding it from him. And so we just started all of a sudden talking about God. And then we started getting letters from these guys that were in jail. We hadn't seen them in probably been about a month or so. And all four of them, without speaking to each other, had met Christians in prison and had become believers in Jesus. We wound up getting invited to a church. People just embraced us, and I started going to church and hearing the gospel presented. And I remember in those early days, just every time there was an altar call, almost, I'd raise my hand. I just wanted God in my life. I wanted him to forgive and to wash the sin out of my heart. And as I would go, I would actually physically feel that God has taken this 20-year-old young man who had no purpose, no reason, no desire to do anything. I started to just read the Word of God, and then I began to read the Old Testament, and just everything fit together, and even to the point of my own sense of Jewishness. Really, for the first time, now I really felt like I was Jewish. I love now to be in situations and to say what I often say to people. Jesus wasn't a Christian. Jesus was a Jew. The New Testament is Jewish. I could just feel my life just being totally changed and falling in love with this Jesus who had every answer for every question that I had. Jesus has become everything to me.
My name is Shmuel Eliezer ben Moshe Nadler. I grew up in New York City, so you'll pardon me, I'm still learning English. But growing up there, I had a lot of questions. How could we believe in a good God who allowed such a horror of the Holocaust to happen to our people? The rabbi, a very dear and sweet and gentle man, he said, Shmuel, the only thing I can tell you is what I tell myself. He who believes cannot question, and he who questions really cannot believe. Well, that didn't help me at all. And so I went from appearing very religious growing up to then becoming quite rebellious in a sense.
Hitman 2-3, this is Hitman
I was a
2-2,
map
how you
maker
read me now?
for the U.S. Army in Vietnam. During the Battle of Tet, we were under such attack. Horrors were going on. Either you were on drugs or you were drunk. My commander of my unit, he thought he was like John Wayne, and he had scotch in his canteen, and he was drinking scotch. He passed out just before the battle began. Some of the sergeants got so overwrought they were breaking down crying in the bunkers. They say there's no atheists in the foxholes. And so even though I was pretty sure there was no God whatsoever, and the whole thing was like idiocy, the opiate of the people. But because of the kind of horrors that go on in warfare all the time, I might have been interested to hear some good news, even in Vietnam there. And the chaplain comes by, and all he said was, I'm getting out of here, but good luck to you. Some of you won't be here in the morning. I thought, this is a religious person. They were bringing troops through and going on to other areas for deployment. And so they were sleeping out in the open, and we were under attack all the time, incoming missiles. And I remember saying, to the officer in charge, I said, listen, let them sleep in the barn, because at least they'll have some protection. And the officer said, no, they don't have the clearance to sleep in the barn with the maps. The next morning, all there was puddles of blood from these fellas, and all I could think of was the heartache. War is a horrific thing. Horrific thing. I was what might be considered politely in English an unregistered pharmacist, a drug dealer, not particularly kosher. I would run into people who had the nerve to be on the streets of San Francisco proclaiming this Messiah, Jesus. I was a little bit off-put by it because they smiled too much. I didn't think that people should smile that much. Who could be that happy? But one of them, one night, had the nerve to try to tell me that I needed to believe in Jesus. I felt so offended. Let me tell you why. I thought, oh my goodness, they want me to go to the side of our enemy. It turns out that he said he was Jewish. My heart broke for him. I thought, a Jew who believes this? This has to be the dumbest Jew who ever lived. What kind of Jew believes in such narishkeit, such foolishness? He invited me to go to what he called a Bible study. I thought maybe it was like an archaeological find. They have a Bible, they'll look at it from different sides. I couldn't figure out what that might be. I would go there to laugh at them. I thought it would be my evening entertainment. Now, I got there, and there was a pretty ordinary-looking group of people. Each one had a Bible. I thought that was pretty interesting. They each had their own Bible. But they were taking everything so seriously. What do they think? These are God's love letters to them? And the portion that they were looking at was in the prophets, in Isaiah chapter 53. In traditional Judaism, we don't study Isaiah 53. That portion is skipped over by our rabbis. They wanted me to give my opinion of who I thought the prophet was talking about. Give me a minute. Let me take a look at this thing. As I was reading through it, it would talk about one. It said, all we, like sheep, have all gone astray. Each one has turned to his own way. But Hashem has laid on him the iniquity of us all. It said there that he would be killed, cut off from the land of the living for the transgression of my people. What a strange thing for our scriptures to say. And I got to the last verse in that section, and even though he'd been cut off, it said there that he would give the gifts, the spoils, to the stronger faith, because he had been cut off for my people, for my sins. How could he? I thought he had died. Now he's giving. And it came to me that he hadn't. Maybe he came back to life. At that point, it came very clear what this section of scripture was speaking about. It seemed to be talking about you know who, that Jesus. Nothing is supposed to be this clear. These are really tricky, sneaky people. They put part of their Bible in what's supposed to be my Bible. What a bunch of idiots, thinking they're going to be able to trick real Jews, you know? And so when they said, so who do you think it's speaking about? I looked at them and I said, I don't know. I don't think anyone can tell. The Bible is such a mystery. No one can ever figure this out. They looked so disappointed. And they said to me, well, we'll be praying for you. I said, fat chance. What kind of God is there that'll want to answer prayers for someone like me? Where was this God in the Holocaust? I said to them. Over that period of time, I found myself thinking more and more about it. My goodness, this might be our Messiah. I didn't like that. I remember, okay, God, if you have a Messiah for us, that's fine. But please, someone besides this Jesus. I was living in a very bad place where people were doing drugs. But some thoughts entered my mind. It seemed somehow clear to my thinking that drugs were opening me up to the Spirit, but it was the wrong spirit. That there was a spiritual battle for my soul. But I was on the losing side. I wasn't sure. I got on my knees there and I cried out for Jesus to save me. I woke up that next morning. Somehow, I knew my life was different. I wasn't sure about all the details, but and in my heart, I actually believed that Jesus is Lord, is our Messiah. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure where to go. Who do you talk to about these things? Not in that world. Well, there was a restaurant. There were pictures of Jesus on the wall. I really didn't know what would make someone a believer or something, so I thought that was a pretty good shot. So I went in there. It was really early in the morning. I didn't know what to do. They were just opening up the place, the manager opening up. And I said to him, hey, listen, Jesus saved me last night. What do I do now? The guy looked at me and said, I don't know. You want breakfast? Then I remembered that a long time before, I had gone to this, couldn't remember what they called it, a Bible thing, but maybe they would know what to do. I couldn't believe that they would remember me. But nonetheless, I called them up and I said, listen, my name is Sam Nadler. I came to your Bible thing a long time ago. And, well, listen, Jesus saved me last night. What do I do now? They were so happy. They had been praying for me every day. Today, when people ask me, how can you believe in God in light of the Holocaust? In all of our afflictions, he was afflicted. And so to be his people means to be kind of his raw nerve endings. In all of these matters, he is afflicted. He mourns and he cries over all of our pains and issues, let alone something like the Holocaust. But he, may his name be blessed forever. Our Messiah, he loved the unlovable. He forgave the unforgivable. But yet he died a horrible, evil, torturous death by crucifixion. He understands the pain of the Holocaust. He knows what it's like to go through your personal Holocaust. This is what he brings to our hearts as well.
One day, Janie, 3.5, comes home from school and says, Daddy, why don't we believe in Jesus? And I'm like, realize I'm in deep trouble. I know I'm supposed to raise my kids Jewish. I know it's my job. And I have no idea what I believe and why I believe it. I have no idea what it means to be a Jew at this point. So at that point, I knew I had to figure this out. Back then, if I think about what I believed, what I thought Jesus was, to me, there were some things I knew Jesus was not. Jesus was not for the Jewish people. I didn't even know if Jesus existed. I put him somewhere with Santa Claus as a fictitious story that people had made up. But I did know, people that believed in Jesus, that I looked back on my life, there was something different about them, that they had a peace and a joy about them. Edna Burns, wow. She, amazing black woman, came from the South, took a bus up, no job, no money. Her teeth were even dentures or something. They weren't even real teeth. But what I loved about Edna, and everyone loves Edna, everyone knew there was something different about Edna in my family. She had so much wisdom. She had so much love, so much patience. And we knew she loved Jesus. And we knew there was something different about Edna. 34, 35, maybe 40 years after Edna entered our house and was one of the major influences in my life that I just am so thankful for every day. She passes away. I'm so asleep, probably selfish, that as opposed to going to this woman that took care of me forever, I say, I'm not gonna go. I wanna play in a tennis tournament. So I walk into that funeral and it is deep, deep center Philadelphia, but there were mouths running through it. It was dirty. It was a church that was built, and I think about it, there was maybe 20 benches there. They were kind of beaten up, and it was just a room. But if I look back in that room at that time, there was so much spirit and passion and excitement and joy. And Edna, who they loved, had passed away. And I will never forget that moment and the joy and the excitement in that room for Jesus. I grew up in a great Reformed Jewish family where Judaism was so important to us. And the rabbi was a great family friend, very smart man, and someone I had a lot of respect for. It's just a beautiful temple with great ceilings and great drawings on the roof and a beautiful choir. That Reformed Judaism was a huge part of my life. But to me, there was something missing there. We read about David and we read the Psalms and we read the Torah, But did we really believe it? Did the rabbi believe it? Or was it just a story that we were hearing? It's Yom Kippur. I'm still focused on what it's like to be a Jew. So we go through Yom Kippur. I'm fasting like a good Jew does. My heart is pounding. I am itching all over. I can't breathe. And we barely get to the hospital in time. The people at the hospital saved my life. And I think I'm having a heart attack and about to die. I'm basically in anaphylactic shock, and my body shuts down. What happened on that day, I look back on it, and it was a clear wake-up call. And I knew that, again, still, God's chasing me, and I have to figure something out at this point. That, again, pushed me on my journey to really try and figure out what is the truth and what do I believe? Now I'm really starting to research. Now I'm reading. I went 35 years and I didn't read anything. So I read more in 2 years than I had in my whole life combined. I read a book by Stan Telchin called Betrayed. Stan is a gentleman that was trying to convince others that his daughter was wrong because she came home and said that she was Jewish and that Jesus was real. And Stan's whole mission was to prove her wrong. All of a sudden, I put it down and I said to my friend, this is me. What he said here is exactly what I'm going through. God at this point begins to send more and more people that I used to think were weird, maybe less, but there was some peace that they had. And for me, they had the truth. And there was some level of peace and comfort and assurance that they were walking around with. And I became envious of that. There was a great teacher in New York City, a preacher named Tim Keller. And I remember hearing him, and everything he said made sense. It was so simple. It was so orderly. And I look at that in contrast to the teaching that I had in the Reformed Temple. I said to myself, where is the Jewish Tim Keller? And I realized it was because Tim had truth on his side. And the Reformed rabbi was doing a great job being a good person, but he didn't have the truth in the foundation. The only thing I thought I knew was that Jesus, Yeshua, was not for the Jews. Now I'm 100% sure as I look at the Torah and I read the Bible that Jesus is for the Jews.
I want to tell you a story. God created people because he loves stories. So I'll tell you my story. My name is Stuart, and I'm a New York Jew. I'm proud to say I'm born in Flatbush, which next to being born in Israel is the second best thing. I grew up at the intersection of the Christian and Jewish worlds because my father was from a very Orthodox family. My mother was the sixth child in a Sicilian family. And his family was just plain thrilled, as you can well imagine. Even though my mother converted to Judaism, she was always considered to be second best. So I grew up in the midst of this dissonance between the Christian and Jewish worlds. And my whole religious mentality at that time was, when we all drop dead, we'll find out who was right. My first career was in music, and I went to a place called Manhattan School of Music. And one day, a friend of mine invited me to a discussion group. She said, look, it's about the New Testament. I know you're Jewish, but you might have some interesting opinions. When I cracked open the New Testament, I kept on bumping into Passover, which was rather surprising. I did not expect to find anything Jewish in this book, but I did. I assumed that it was one of those books that I saw nuns reading on the subway, something written in Latin. It was none of those things. But besides its native Jewishness, I remember reading when Yeshua said that it's not what goes into a man that defiles him. It's what comes out of a man's heart that defiles him. Because out of the heart come fornication, thefts, murder, wickedness, etc., etc. These come from within, and they defile a man. And I remember when I read that, it made so much sense to me that the problem of evil in the world is not out there in the air, in the ozone, in the system. The problem of evil comes from the heart of man. Eventually, in the course of my reading this book, Yeshua said this, "I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly." And that blew me away. And it was extraordinary to me that Yeshua's words directly addressed my own felt need. When you pop open the scriptures, you pop open our Torah, the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, on every page you find people who are interacting with God in the context of a living relationship. What do I mean when I talk about having a relationship with God and relationship with God through Yeshua? What is this relationship stuff? And I've got to use a word that many people don't like to use, and that word is experience. That's what I mean by relationship. It's an experiential linkage with the living God. So I would ask people, where is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Where is the God to whom the patriarchs and the matriarchs talked, who had this two-way relationship? And are you interested in pursuing the possibility of this two-way relationship being a reality in your life? In my experience, and the experience of many people I know, to our astonishment, when we encountered Yeshua of Nazareth and began to think of him in a different way than we had been brought up to think of him, we all of us discovered that this two-way relationship came alive. Yeshua said of himself something. He said, "I am the door." Now, many people treat Yeshua like he's the exit from Jewish life. I think that's wrong. He is the door, for me, into a more passionate engagement with Jewish life, and also a total passionate engagement with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Don't imagine that people like me, who come to believe in Yeshua, that somebody gave us some kind of a fancy-dancy presentation and explanation, and we signed on the dotted line because we were gullible and we were easy to persuade. That's not the way it goes. What's missing from that scenario is the element of encounter. Moses had his burning bush. Abraham had God saying, "Lech lecha," leave the land of your birth and go to the land I will show you. These great patriarchs and matriarchs of Israel had experiences with God, sometimes spaced apart by many years, but they kept on following God because they could not deny their experience. Each of us, in the context of our own lives, has encountered God in a way that we didn't encounter him before, in a way that we cannot ignore without denying ourselves. I'm talking about transformational experiences that move our lives forward. I'm not telling you to make my experience your experience. I'm telling you that God will give you experiences of himself that are sufficient for your belief. I can't really explain it to you in a way that your experience can, but if you can come to the point where you can say, what if it is true? Then just maybe you will taste and see. But when the most remarkable person who ever lived says, "I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly," then you got to take a second look. I did, and I'm finding that that life is more abundant. It's life with a capital L, and it's very different from life without him. Trust me. Better yet, trust him, don't trust me. Taste and see.
Everyone is working their way up to God. They really don't get into the fact that really God came down to us. There was an explanation of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the Sunday school teacher had an actual scale, and she was demonstrating how we had this on the good side, this on the bad side. We had to make sure that the good side outweighed the bad side for us to be written into the book of life. 3rd grade, I'm 8 years old, I was petrified. Needed to please this God, okay? I have to be holy, I have to be holy. You can't do it, it doesn't make sense. I would ask so many questions. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose? What's the meaning? Historical significance? If the good outweighs the bad, then I'm written in the book of life, but the holiday comes around the next year, so I'm only written in for that 1 year. The response was always the same. We're doing this because this is what Jews do. I also felt this emptiness inside of me, the need to be the best, perfectionist, living up to expectations, a lot of anxiety. And I was really good in my roles, whether it was a role of a daughter, a role of a student, wife, mom, trying to control things, my situations, people. If I can do everything, I don't need God. I was invited to a women's seminar. There was a woman who had a real potter's wheel, and she was molding a pot. She was focused on the scripture discussing, we are the clay, you are potter, we are all the work of your hands. If I'm the clay and God is molding me, he had a reason for it. I'm listening to the speaker. She's seamlessly weaving the story, the scriptures from the Tanakh to the New Testament all throughout. Everything from childhood are just like flooding into me, questions, the questions that I would hammer away as that child. And God gave me such a supernatural oomph, desire, hunger, ability to all of a sudden research. And I'm digging and finding all sorts of fascinating things. Talking to some rabbis, I would ask questions, and the answers would drive me to scripture because to me they felt somewhat incomplete. Many in the Jewish community don't receive the New Testament as something for Jewish people. So much has been done in the name of Jesus. It's just accepted, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, this is who we are, this is who we're not. Jesus, Jews, it just doesn't connect. If you're a culture that has been so persecuted and you're holding on to something so tightly, it makes you dig in your heels and make sure that you retain that ethnicity even stronger. And I don't even know what I was looking for, quite honestly. But in all my delving, I started to see that it's not this separate book. It actually is seamlessly connected to the Tanakh. Everything flows. All the blood sacrifices in Leviticus, and again, coming back to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, what the holidays signify, all that was leading up to Jesus. He's the final sacrifice. Atonement is a covering. He removed my body of sin. He took that upon himself on the cross. And then he gave me his righteousness. And at that moment, it was crystal clear. Everything was hitting me and I was crying. My sin, past, present, and future, is forgiven. That's freedom. The shackles came flying off. I was just given a whole brand new identity. I am holy. I am forgiven. I am righteous. I am his beloved. To give control that I've never really had away to a God who not only is he in control, he's sovereign. He is in complete control of every molecule on this planet, including me. It's not this gritting my teeth trying to please this distant holy God. It takes the pressure off of me because it's not about me. I'm free to live. I'm free to walk. I'm free to do. I'm free to let other people be who they are. It is exciting. I have a purpose. My purpose in life is to live for God. I know who he is now, and every day I'm learning more and more and more who he is. Follow his leading. Enjoy him forever.
I'm Andrew Clavin. I got the worst possible mark in every class in Hebrew school, and my father used to say they can't flunk you out of being Jewish, but I came very close. By the time I was bar mitzvahed, I was so completely estranged from this entire tradition, I didn't want to do it at all. It meant nothing to me. I gave in, I had to. I was forced to be bar mitzvahed and say these things that I didn't believe. So I ad-libbed the Hebrew in my bar mitzvah because I really barely learned the portion of the Torah I was supposed to read. I was making up Hebrew words to get through it. It was just anything I could to get through. And at that time, when you had a bar mitzvah, people just piled presents on you. Savings bonds, money, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of jewelry that I got from my bar mitzvah. And I put it all in this big leather box, which I also got from my bar mitzvah. It was the first time I ever had any wealth that was my own. I was 13 years old and I was very excited by it. And so I had this box and I would keep it in a little closet, a little pantry kind of closet in my room. And every now and again I'd take it out and just kind of stare at this. I never wore a lot of jewelry, but I would just stare at this wealth that I had accumulated. But over the course of, let's call it the next 6 months, the joy of this wealth started to seep out of me. I began to feel that I had done a truly hypocritical thing. These are ill-gotten gains. I was bought off. I let someone give me money to say what I did not believe. I kind of naturally had a sense that God was there, but I hated the hypocrisy. I hated the fact that I'd been bullied into something. I hated the fact that I'd been bought off. And it started to dawn on me that it must have been very important to me that I had lied about God specifically. And one night, I waited till the entire house had gone to bed, and I took out this box full of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, and I crept outside and I stuffed it in the garbage because I felt so bad about it. I remember stuffing, I can feel, even whenever I talk about it, I can feel the broken eggshells and the coffee grounds on my arm because I shoved it down deep because I was afraid somebody would find it before they would throw the garbage away. And in the morning, the garbage men came and they took the garbage and this jewelry and they threw it away. And that was meant to be the end of my religious life. I loved stories. I wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. I love tough guy stories because I didn't get along with my father. I needed a male role model, and I turned to stories like by Ernest Hemingway and the tough guy detective stories of Raymond Chandler and The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. These tough detectives, and I thought these are the kinds of men I want to be like. These are the guys who walk in a corrupt world, but they carry this kind of integrity inside themselves. As I studied literature, I realized that Jesus was at the center of all of Western literature. I should find out about this. I should find out about it. I went into my bedroom and I closed the door and I started to read the Gospel according to St. Luke. One of the funny things about the Gospel is that people have this concept of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. If you can go into the Gospel and find a place where gentle Jesus, meek and mild exists, I will pay to see it, because Jesus is a hard man. He walks into these deadly situations. Even when they're threatening him with death, he just says what he has to say. And that to me, especially in this world of lies, that to me is so important, such a great model for any man. And my father liked to sabotage anything that I did. So like if he heard me writing, if he heard me typing, he would always break in on me and try to mess up my concentration. And so while I'm reading this, he walked in without knocking. He threw open the door and he caught me reading the Gospel according to St. Luke. Now you have to think about this for a minute, right? I'm 15 years old. He could have walked in on me with a girl in the bed. I was doing that. But he walked in on me reading the Gospel according to St. Luke, and he was furious. I mean, the rage came out of him in little bits because he was trying not to let it out, but it kept bubbling up out of him like hot tar, and he couldn't stop it. He was cursing at me. He was using, foul language, and he would keep bursting out. And we went in to have dinner, and we'd sit down, and it kept coming out, and it kept coming out. And I'm trying to explain to him, I'm not reading it for religious purposes. I'm not reading this for religious purposes. I'm reading it for literary purposes. I just wanted to know what all these guys were writing about. And he pointed his finger at my nose and he said, if you ever convert, I will disown you. I'll disown you. There was only one ambition that I had. I wanted to be a novelist. That was what I wanted. I applied to the University of California at Berkeley because it was so far away from my New York home. And I went into the first of my terrible, terrible depressions. I called them the bola because they were like that throwing thing. It would just kind of appear out of nowhere and wrap itself around my throat and choke me with this sorrow. And I was torn up. I was so broken and crazy inside that I didn't understand, how to communicate with other people, how to write stories. I knew I had a talent for writing stories, but I couldn't write stories that people liked because my mind was so messed up and I was so full of rage and twistedness and it didn't appear. I wasn't like a crazy person. You looked at me and you would have thought, well, he seems like a really, all put together guy, but I was not. I was really broken inside. And I didn't know I was going insane. I didn't realize I was going mad because I had that romance of the intellectual. An intellectual is miserable. An intellectual faces things. He tells the truth. He looks life in the eye, and life is meaningless, and life is death. And because he sees these things, he's a man of sorrow. And so I just thought I was a typical intellectual. It's like that song. It's hip to be miserable when you're young and intellectual. That's what I thought I was. But I was in so much pain. I did begin crying out to God in this kind of sick, superstitious way. I mean, I remember, trying all these kind of spiritual experiments to try and get clear. I published a novel when I was about 26, and the book didn't sell. I couldn't publish it, and it just died. It was such an experience of grief, I didn't even feel the grief. And I just started to unravel. And at the same time, my wife became pregnant. I'm trying to write, and I'm picking up a little bit of money, but we're slowly going broke, and I'm slowly going crazy. I'm just going crazy. My books became unreadable. My writing, I'd always prided myself on this clean, clear American prose, and suddenly I was writing these convoluted sentences that nobody could understand. I not only couldn't sell my books anymore, I couldn't even get an agent. I couldn't do anything. I was just frozen. I was so depressed. I was in my bedroom, and my wife was outside. Sometimes she would sleep on the couch so I could work in the bedroom because that's where my desk was. My little baby daughter was in her nursery. I was drinking, not heavily, but I was drinking a scotch, and I was smoking cigarettes, and I was thinking about killing myself. I had had suicidal thoughts before, but this was different. This was the real deal. I was sitting there thinking, I don't know how to live. I do not know how to live. And there was a radio playing a baseball game, the Mets game, and it was just playing in the background. I wasn't listening to it. I was just sitting. I was thinking about throwing myself off the roof because we lived in an 8-10-story building, and I was just thinking I could just walk up there and everybody would be happier. My wife would be better off. My daughter would be better off. I don't know how to live. In the baseball game, the Mets had a player that I just loved named Gary Carter, and Gary Carter was a devout Christian. And whenever they would interview him after a game, how did it feel when you hit that home run? He would say, oh, praise Jesus, Jesus, I'm so happy I hit that home run. And I used to think like, oh, Gary, stop, it just went right up my spine. It was like somebody had dropped a worm down my back, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And after the game, I'm sitting there considering suicide, drink in one hand, cigarette in the other. And after the game, Carter won the game by beating out a single to first base. In other words, he hit a ground ball and he ran so fast that the throw was late and he got to first base before the throw, which was amazing because Carter's knees were gone. He was a catcher and he spent all this time squatting. He had terrible knees. So after the game, the interviewer came up to him and said, how could you run so fast when your knees are so bad? And if Carter in that moment had said, Jesus, 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 I wouldn't have heard it. I was no way ready for that. I had pushed God completely out of my life. But he didn't. What he said was, sometimes you just have to play in pain. I remember thinking, I heard that, and I remember thinking, well, I can do that. I'm a tough guy. I've always been a tough guy. I can play in pain. And that was the answer. How do you live? Sometimes you got to play in pain. I think about that a lot these days, and that this Christian ball player who was clearly given these words by God to speak to me, that he didn't use God's name, that I wouldn't have heard God's name, that the King of the universe put himself out of the picture to reach me. That's, a kind of humility that you don't see in a lot of people. Anyway, that was the last time I ever thought of suicide. I was reading a book, a sea adventure story, great book. I love Patrick O'Brian, great author. at the end of this chapter, it said, his name was Matron. It said, Matron said a quick prayer and fell asleep. And I thought, well, if he can say a prayer, because he was a very intellectual character, I really loved him. There was a series of books, and I just really identified with this character. I thought, if he can say a prayer, I can say a prayer. Here I was, my career was going great. I had married this woman I just adored. I had 2 children I just adored. I was so happy that I had come through this period of pain and emotional breakdown and had changed everything in my life. And so I said a 3-word prayer. I said, thank you, God. And I went to sleep. The next morning I woke up and everything had changed. I was suddenly more alive. I suddenly saw everything more clearly. I had been trying to see things clearly since I was a little boy. I remember as a child thinking, I can't get past my daydreams. I can't get past my own thoughts. And suddenly, there it was. There it was. Everything was beautiful. Everything, my wife, I could see my wife's face. I could see the coffee in the cup. I went out into London, one of the most beautiful cities on earth, and I could see the city, and it was all clear. And I realized it was that prayer. It was those 3 words. 3-word prayer. And it was kind of an intellectual experiment for me, but for God, it was the lifeline that he needed. It was the connection he was looking for. What I had been looking for in my life as a writer, as an artist, I had been looking to be directly connected to life. You can't be directly connected to life until you're connected to God, because God is the source of life. Not just the source of life from the beginning, from creation, but the source of life right now, right this minute. And you can't know God, he's just too big for the mind, unless you know him through Christ, who is a man like you. I was connected to the world. I had life in abundance, that great promise. I want you to live, and I want you to live abundantly. You know, my father was afraid that by embracing Christ, I would be leaving Judaism behind, but weirdly, I never really felt connected to my Judaism until I found Jesus. When I found Jesus, that was the first time I started to think, oh, that's what all that stuff in the Bible meant. That's why, there were those traditions. That's why there were those passages that never meant anything to me before. I always had a connection with my cultural Judaism. I always knew I was a Jew, was happy and at peace with that. But I never understood the religious aspects of it until Jesus came into my life. It's absolutely true. Until I was baptized, I don't think I was a Jew. And it has been just a remarkable, remarkable adventure. I don't even know how to communicate the way all of life makes sense now. The way you know what it is? It's the difference between sailing in absolute darkness on a stormy sea and sailing in darkness on a stormy sea, but you can see the North Star, so you know where you're going. And suddenly the storm doesn't bother you. Suddenly the darkness doesn't bother you, because you know exactly where you're headed, and you've got that star to lead you. And I think that's my testimony, guys.
In southern Mexico, there were magic mushrooms. And I thought, if we can get to southern Mexico and try those mushrooms, maybe those would help Ron and I understand who we were even better, and maybe understand who God was better. I went to the University of Buffalo, and when I was at Buffalo, that was a time in my life when I was particularly really searching for God. There was just this deep longing in my soul of wanting that there was more to life, that what I had experienced growing up in my Jewish faith served a purpose and was good, but I just felt that there was so much more there, so much more that I wanted to know about God and myself and life. So when I was at Buffalo, I was experimenting in drugs, and I read a lot of books, primarily Eastern books, all with the purpose, all with of trying to understand and find God. And then I realized maybe if I left the city and moved out to the country, maybe a place that was very remote, that maybe I could find God in a more intimate way there. So we decided that we were going to raise tomatoes, and we found 20 acres of land, Ron and I, in southern Oregon. And it was beautiful, a creek and a log house. And it was there we thought we would put the greenhouse and start this little tomato business. What happened was when we got there and we had our dream realized, I began to see that this was not satisfying, that I was more depressed, more discouraged than ever before in my life. Now we come up with another idea. We decided we were going to hitchhike down to Mexico, and we did. Almost every ride, they were talking to us about the Bible, about Jesus. I couldn't relate at all. I mean, it just didn't make any sense to me. I was Jewish. Just when we were about to go up to the mountain to get these mushrooms, we find out that they were busting all these long hairs from America, and they said, don't go up the mountain because you'll wind up in jail in Mexico. So on our way back from Mexico, because that trip was a total disaster, we stopped in San Francisco. Ron had introduced me to a girl, Deborah, so we spent a whole weekend together at his brother's place. And we spent hours and hours together that weekend talking and just sharing with each other. At the end of that weekend, I was in love with her. I asked her to marry me. She said no, of course. She thought I was nuts. But something happened in my heart that weekend. Something shifted in me, and I was in love. And I had never experienced this incredible feeling before. I wanted to give something back to God. I didn't know how, but someone had given me a Bible several months earlier, and I thought, all right, I'm going to read the Bible. And of course, I was familiar with the Old Testament, and I started reading the Old Testament. And in college, I couldn't relate, but now the Bible was coming alive. Anything that I read, Genesis, Exodus, Psalms, anything, it just was so meaningful to me, and I just felt so close to God. And then I get to the New Testament. Now, being raised Jewish, I knew nothing about the New Testament or Jesus. Some of the things he said really disturbed me. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man can come to the Father but through me. And I said, how could this be? And he said, the Father and I are one. And I said, but there's only one God. Jesus may be a great man, and I was so confused. I wasn't sharing this with anyone. Ron and I had a close relationship, but I just felt that I couldn't talk to him about these particular things. And then one night, I was standing under the stars near our little cabin, and I said, God, if you and Jesus are the same, you got to show me that this is the right thing to do, because I was really scared. Something happened in my heart that night. The next morning, I shared with Ron what had happened that night before, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, when we were hitchhiking down to Mexico and we were getting picked up, I started reading the Bible, and I started also to talk to God, and I also believed in Jesus, but I didn't share this with you, Mike, because I was afraid, and here we are, that next day, just embracing each other and crying and sharing with each other how God had met us and how we both asked Jesus to come into our life, and we couldn't believe it. We went to this church. It was life-changing for us. But I was still asking God to show me that this was the right decision. Well, the pastor from that church, he was retired. He was in his early 70s. He came out to our cabin one day to see me. And he didn't know what I was wrestling with, but he started to read a portion of scripture to me. It was, who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? And he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, a root out of dry ground. And he was wounded for our transgressions, and by his stripes we are healed. And he said, Brother Michael, he said, where do you think this is? And I said, I don't know, Matthew, Luke? And he hands me the Bible, and I look, and it said Isaiah. And I said, "You're kidding." I said, "This is in the Old Testament?" Because it was so obvious to me that it was talking about Jesus. And he started to share with me scriptures from all over the Old Testament, showing me that Jesus was the Messiah. And that prayer that I had asked God, show me that this is the right decision. That day I felt so secure and so satisfied as this pastor started sharing with me from the Old Testament about those scriptures. And I was so thankful to God that he had answered my prayer. Deborah came up to visit us up in Oregon, and I started to read to her from the scriptures, and she also started to believe in Jesus. And a few months later, we got married. She's still my best friend to this day. We have an amazing, amazing marriage. My friend Ron, instead of the tomatoes, we decided to start a little business together, so we started a light bulb business. And I guess I took the Lord literally when he said, "Be lights of the world," and we went into the lighting business. And that little tiny seed has grown into one of the largest lighting companies in the United States. And when we went back to share with our family, my mom and my dad and my brother have also come to believe in Jesus, and that is tremendous. I know that Christianity, I know that believing in Jesus is, there's so much from the past with the Holocaust and what Christians have done, but this has nothing to do with Jesus. This has nothing to do with the Bible. And the Messiah that was prophesied long time ago, I just would encourage you and challenge you like I did to search and ask and read the scriptures for yourself, with just asking God with an open heart and an open mind, could Jesus really be the Messiah?
I had no idea the violent response I got from my father, and all I wanted was my dad to love me, and now he's calling me an idiot. And now he's telling me I'm as crazy as my brother. I grew up in Passaic, New Jersey in a conservative family. We went to synagogue every week. It was the center of our lives. My parents were in the choir. My mom and dad sang. And it was pretty much our whole world was the synagogue. I didn't know what happened. When my brother came back, he was in and out of the hospital, and it was like it was not him. And I had no framework to understand it. It scared the crap out of me. And he had, at times, what seemed like superhuman strength. And I wondered if I would ever get my brother back, the brother I knew and loved. We were very close, and I was deeply, deeply afraid that I had lost my brother. I came home from Hofstra, walked into the kitchen. Here I see my pretty observant Jewish brother sitting at the kitchen table telling my mother about Jesus, and I was like, adding to what I thought was already abnormal. Now my brother's sitting at the table telling my mother about Jesus, and I was horrified. I just didn't know what to think of it. I was so afraid of what had happened to my brother, and now the confusion of adding Jesus to it. But over the next few weeks, I could see that the stories he was telling me were supernatural, that this monstrous thing that was taking over his life was gone. And it was a God thing. And it was so apparent to me that this was a God thing that I said in the core of my being, I can't even explain what that means. It was just deep, deep, deep inside of me. I said, whatever this is, I have to have it. I have to know I have to know the source of what saved him from this monstrous life he was living. I had to have it for myself. My brother was looking for help. He went to have friends who were going to some kind of a meeting, and it turned out to be a Black Pentecostal church. And they ended up praying for him. He was healed. And all of this nightmare was gone. So I went down to Philadelphia because I wanted what my brother had. And I did say yes to this. I said, I want to know God the way you know God. And I came home excited about it, and I told my family. It didn't make my family happy. Everybody was angry. The pressure between the divorce and the pressure with my brother's, what looked like an illness, adding Jesus to it. Now my dad rejecting me brand new all over again because I said I believed, and he pretty much cursed me out. It was more than I could take, and I just said, I'm done. My girlfriend and I, we've been running from God for 3 years. We're planning to get married. We wanted nothing to do with God. We didn't even want God mentioned in the wedding. And we went to a coffee house ministry because there was food. And then it got uncomfortable when this guy named Pastor Gary started talking to us about Jesus. And we just wanted to leave, and we said, we're sorry, but we got to go. And he asked me, what are you so afraid of? And I said, I'm saving him for last, I guess. But I'm afraid if I ask him, he's not going to respond. So today, 40 years later from that incredible decision between coming to truly believe in Yeshua together, my wife and I got married 2 weeks later, and it's been an incredible journey. We have pioneered a Messianic synagogue. We're part of this movement of making Yeshua relevant, and we made it relevant for our children. They all love God. We've made a Jewish home, and we've had a great marriage, which was my greatest fear of all, and my wife's greatest fear of all was, how do we ever have hope to have a happy marriage and happy children and grandchildren? And God has given us that more than we could have ever imagined. He not only healed my brother, he healed me, he healed my wife, and he gave us a beautiful family, and we've raised our family to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength.
I mean, what does a guy say about his story? Dr. Seif, Professor Seif, Officer Seif, Sergeant Seif, Pastor, Rabbi, whatever. You know, I've carried all those titles. I never in a million years thought of that. Well, a hearty shalom to all of you. Jeffrey Seif here. That's how Jews say it in Texas. Seif is a German name. My mother and father met in America. Mom was smuggled out of Nazi Germany by nuns. Mom died in a mental hospital because we could get Mom out of Germany, but couldn't quite get Germany out of Mom. I went to Jewish school. I went to the Jewish Community Center after school. I lived in Jewish neighborhood and had Jewish friends. I didn't know there was really anything but being Jewish. One time, about 12 or 13, I'm walking down the street, and these two girls, they yelled, "Hey, you dirty Jew, you killed Christ." I remember that vividly. I don't know, I didn't understand what Christians were all about. My parents sent me to a yeshiva, a religious Jewish school, and it was strict. It really didn't mediate life to me, and I wasn't interested in Rabbi Hoffman. I was interested in Abby Hoffman, you know, being a hippie, and I pushed away from Judaism. Not out of any dislike for Judaism, but just part of my own quest for discovery. Well, I'm 16 years old, laying in bed. My mother comes in and tells me to clean up the room, and I give her a hard time. She says, "Well, if you don't like it, you can leave." So I left. Running away from home, hitchhiking to California happened just like that. A couple weeks later, I'm in San Francisco meditating in Haight-Ashbury in the park. That's when I think I got my first exposure to Christians that were okay. You know, they were nice, they were gracious, they'd give me a ride, they would want to give me a meal. You know, I realized there were Christian people out there in the world that were kind of cool. It's really important in the Jewish world, you know, education is king, but I was just high all the time, and in high school I just drifted through with a lot of D's and F's. You know, I just wasn't on anyone's most likely to succeed list. It's kind of like roadkill on the highway of life. I was in Pennsylvania, and I was walking down the street, and a guy with hair down to his waist comes up to me and gives me a pamphlet and wants to talk to me about Jesus. And I says, "Look, man, you know, I'm Jewish. I don't believe in Jesus." And he said, "Why not?" I said, I don't know. I just don't. You know, Jesus was a Jew. Give it a second look. And then he whips out a Bible and shows me stuff in there, and I was just amazed. The virtues of kindness, love, compassion toward your own and toward the brother from another mother are in the biblical text, in the Hebrew Bible. But it comes forth much clearer in the newer covenant, where one understands that the God of Israel isn't just about extending graces to Israel, it's all about the world. And that's the story from the get-go, you know, when the Lord speaks to Abraham and he says, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. There's a way to get the grace out global. When I discovered Israel's Messiah and asked Jesus into my heart, that mediated such life, such energy, this whole new starburst of enthusiasm, this new approach to life, whole new beginning there. I wound up getting an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degree, and 2 doctoral degrees, and became a college professor. I never saw that in the stars. I took a sabbatical from teaching and went to the police academy, just donating services as a police officer. And I do that to this day as a director, the associate director of a police academy in Dallas. It's a rather odd combination. People think the religious thing on the one hand and the streets on the other, but to me, you know, it's all about helping people. There's lots of problems in this world. I want to be part of the cure. When I look at the first few chapters of the Bible, I wrap yellow crime scene tape all around it. I mean, you haven't read 5 minutes into the Bible till you realize that sin has made its entrance onto the stage of the human drama. At the end of the day, we all have a little bit of Adam and Eve in us. And, you know, I believe that God so loved the world that he sent his son into the world. And he didn't just come into the world in general, that he wants to come into our world in particular. I know the real me. I really don't think I'm all that much now. And I know I wasn't a whole lot when it all began. Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And inasmuch as God was gracious to see potential in me, not just problems, would it be that I'm more capable to see that in others? And would it be that we all were minded to discern what's good and beautiful in people, not just what's disappointing?
I mean, I heard about some of these guys like John the Baptist. He's a Baptist. I found out later on he's Jewish. St. Paul, Jewish? Yeah, Jewish. St. Peter, how can anybody by the name of St. Peter be Jewish? Guess what? I found out they're all Jewish. You know, I grew up in Philadelphia in a Jewish neighborhood. On the other side of the street, that was mostly Gentiles. These poor Gentiles, they would worship a statue. Some of those people had statues in their lawns. At the age of 8 years old, I joined the Cub Scouts, which is part of the Boy Scouts. They still probably have this today, a magazine that's called Boys Life Magazine. And in that magazine, they had the instructions on how to build a crystal radio. I was so excited. It was like I was in heaven with this radio that worked. I would rush home from school and put on the earphones, and I was hearing these people talking about Jesus on the short wave. They were like, at the same time, I was preparing for my bar mitzvah, and my rabbi told me, never believe in Jesus and never read the New Testament. That's a Gentile book, and Jesus is for the Gentiles. I joined the Navy in 1960 and wound up in a drill hall with 400 guys. Now, this is the first time in my life I was ever away from my mother and father. They taught me how to smoke a cigarette. I was coughing like crazy. They said, real sailors drink whiskey. And that was burning my throat. I did it because I wanted to be a real sailor. I wound up getting drunk every night. Wound up going out with women that I shouldn't be doing. Sometime deep down inside of me, I was saying, man, this doesn't feel right. Something's wrong here. This doesn't seem right. You see, when you join the Navy, I don't know if they do this today anymore, but this was back in 1960. We were naked and had our hair shaved, and then we went through the line to get our uniforms and stuff. And at the end of the line, they said Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish. So they gave you a Bible. I had my Tanakh. I had my Jewish scriptures. I don't know what you do with the Bible. I thought, it might be like a rabbit's foot, good luck charm, or maybe it'd be like my grandmother's chicken soup. Anytime I was sick, my grandmother said, have some matzo ball soup, have some chicken soup. I said, will it help? She said, it couldn't hurt, I said, well, I have a Bible. Will it help? Well, it couldn't hurt, One of the sailors that I was with in the Navy said to me, you're Jewish, right? I said, yeah. Do you have a Bible? I I said, sure, I have a Bible. They gave it to me when I joined the Navy. He said, let me see your Bible. And he turned in my Bible to Isaiah chapter 53. He said, here, read this. I read the whole chapter of Isaiah 53. I said, wait a minute. This sounds like those folks across the street. This sounds like the Gentiles. This sounds like what I was hearing on the shortwave. They made a mistake. They gave me New Testament. And my rabbi told me never read the New Testament. You better take this because this is for you. This is not my Bible. I said, no, look, Hebrew Publishing Company. Hebrew Publishing Company. This is crazy. What's Jesus doing in my Bible? He said, well, he's your Messiah. He's my Messiah. I was shocked. And he said, would you like to read about that in the New Testament? I said, well, I can't read the New Testament because my rabbi told me never read the New Testament. And he looked around over here, and he looked over here, and he says, I'll make a deal with you. If you don't tell your rabbi that you read the New Testament, I won't tell him either. I thought about that for a minute. Okay, but I was scared. I thought lightning was going to strike me. I actually thought I was going to be struck by lightning. I expected it to be a Gentile book. I expected it to take place in Rome with a bunch of popes talking about Catholic things and statues. What surprised me is how Jewish the New Testament really is. It's the most Jewish book I ever read. The more I read the scriptures, the more I was praying, I realized that inside I was not clean. Inside, I had all kinds of anger. I was getting drunk every night. I was going with the women. I was smoking 3 packs of unfiltered palm all day, coughing like crazy. I was making pretend like I enjoyed it. I didn't want to make pretend anymore. I didn't want to live that way anymore. Now, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm in the barracks, big barracks. And I had a blanket all the way over, and the light was shining on the New Testament. And I prayed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Lord, Jesus, I'm here. I want to believe in you. And I went to bed. May 16th, 1961, came to faith in the Messiah. That's just so important in my life. It's a moment that totally, completely changed and revolutionized my life. Even if I was the very last person on earth, Jesus would still have died for me. And I am confident that when I die, I'll go to be with him.
Absolutely not. Do not look into this. Are you crazy? I got the message loud and clear. This Yeshua was not for us. I grew up in a family that was, I would say, like conservadox. My mom grew up Orthodox, my dad grew up Reform, and they kind of switched places. My dad became more Orthodox, and my mom became less. We kept kosher, we did, place for milk, place for meat. It was always there, always present. We're Jewish. And I was very happy to be Jewish, and I never wanted to be anything else. I used to go to shul, and we'd sit there and we would pray along with everybody. And I'd keep up with the English because I didn't always understand the Hebrew. And a lot of the time I could feel God's presence there. I just felt like God is here. But then I would go and I would pray and I wouldn't hear back. I liked synagogue. I loved the liturgy. I loved the tradition. I liked even keeping Shabbat, which, isn't always popular. But I liked it. But there's a certain emptiness that was there. It's like, there wasn't power. We always talked about God theoretically, but not personally. And I was so hungry for that because that's what you see in the Tanakh. There came a point after my bat mitzvah where it was just so clear that I kept praying all the prayers and I wasn't hearing. And I started to ask God, why? Why is that? And that summer, a cousin of mine came to visit. She'd just become a believer in Yeshua. And then she started talking to us about, Yeshua, could he actually be the Messiah? Really? I mean, what? Jesus is Yeshua? Jesus could possibly be the Messiah? It just seemed so, what? Something went off in my brain like, well, we're waiting for the Messiah. What if he is? How can I find out if he is? I went to church with her once, just because I was curious. And it was crazy. I was surrounded by people that were running around, that were worshiping God. They had their hands up, they were jumping. There were some people my age, there were some people older. And I thought they were all insane. And I was not at all interested in what was going on. But I felt something different. And then my dad found out where we had been. All hell broke loose. My dad freaked out and nearly kicked my cousin out of the house, and she was staying with us. He did not speak to us for 2 weeks. I talked with my sister and my brother because, we had all been together. What do you think? Could he be the Messiah? And my sister was horrified. It was like I just asked the most horrible thing ever, and I could feel this wall come up, absolutely not. Do not look into this. Are you crazy? She said to me, go and look into our own religion. You don't even know enough yet to even think about this. So I started on a path to become Orthodox because I figured that was the way to know God. So I started to look into the prophecies. I wanted to find out, who is the Messiah? What is the Messiah supposed to do? What do people say about the Messiah? As I read, the one that stood out to me the most was a prophet like Moses, a prophet like Moshe, and that everything that he spoke, we would be responsible for doing. And I just kept thinking, who is a prophet like Moshe, who did miracles like that, somebody on that level? And there'd never been anyone like that, really, except for Yeshua. So my sister went away for a year to kind of find herself, and when she got back, I knew that something had changed inside of her. I noticed such a difference in my sister. And when you grow up with somebody, you can really tell when they're faking it or when they're not. And I could see that something so significant happened in her life. She had a deep anchor, and I needed it. She ended up becoming a believer in Yeshua. I wanted that dream. I wanted that vision. I wanted that lightning experience for God to prove that He's real to me. And finally, I heard a clear voice in my heart saying, you've heard enough, you've seen enough, it's time to just believe. I couldn't deny that Yeshua was real, but I was faced with this dilemma of my dad, my friends. What's gonna happen? It was such a big struggle in my heart. Do you go with the truth or do you go with what's comfortable? But at the end, I couldn't say no. I knew he was real. I knew he was true. And it was like, okay, I'm doing it. It's happening. My dad was like Mount Vesuvius erupting. He was so hurt. He took it very personally. Why are you betraying me? What did I do wrong? Your grandparents would be rolling over in their graves if they could hear this. It would have been better if I was a drug addict than believe in Yeshua. Anything except Yeshua. Whatever the cost was, I figured it's worth it. I love my family more than anything, and I want them to accept me. But sometimes when you say or you choose a side, you have to choose it and you stand on it. To have a close relationship with God, the truth is worth it. Life with Yeshua would be worth it.
It turned out that I had a very rare susceptibility to hypnosis that I didn't know about. I felt something change in me. I felt something controlling me. I remember seeing this dark cloaked image with a bony finger, and he had my parents in a dome, and he said, "You'll never see your parents again." And I remember at one point waking up and noticing that the streetlights were his eyes. And I felt that presence of that force once again. And it was as if I could hear him speaking. And he said, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No, I don't want you here." And it was as if a veil pulled back, and that fiery face that tormented me when I was a child, that I saw and haunted me in my dreams and all of those things, was there. It was coming back again from when I was 3.5 years old or 4 years old. And I said, "I'll kill you." In the meantime, my mom had called the police. They came in. They heard me say, "I'll kill you." When the first one came, I threw him 10 feet across the room, a little 16-year-old skinny kid throwing a big cop. So they knew something was up. I didn't know where the power came from, but it was something that definitely got their attention. And they took me to the hospital, and they were trying to figure out what it was. It was so unusual and so different. They had never seen anything like that. We were in synagogue on Friday nights and on Saturday mornings, and it was always a part of our life. We were helping to meet the minyan for the Mincha Marav service, and it was wonderful. And all I wanted to do was do something that would please God. But I wondered, what about the relationship with God? When I see in the scriptures, when it talked about Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov having a relationship, an intimate relationship with God, I said, how come we don't have that? In my freshman year of college, I was living off campus. I was keeping kosher, I wore my yarmulke, I was doing all these things. I was with my roommate. We had some things that happened that were very unusual and made me feel very under pressure. I felt the presence of that force again that I hadn't experienced since high school, and I thought that was all done, and I got really nervous. And in that moment, I found myself quietly asking God, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And then it came up in that process, the issue with my roommate about Jesus. And I thought, oh, gosh, it's a setup. This is crazy. I said, God, if Jesus is real, I couldn't even say the name. It was so anathema to me. And as I said it, I felt something stirring up and rising up in my stomach. And I thought, whoa, what is this? And I tried it one more time, and it happened. I said, you know what, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to sleep. So the next day, my friends asked me, and my roommate and his friends asked if I wanted to go to church with them. And I said, what do I want to go there for? And inside something said, you need to go there. There's something I need to see. I just knew I had to be there, but I had never been in a church, and it was the last place I would have thought to go. Kind of thought they believed in 3 gods, spoke Latin in church, and hated Jews. And so I assumed Jesus was the biggest anti-Semite of them all, because that's the one they claimed we killed, and that was the one that they claimed was at the forefront of everything they believed. But at the end, they did an altar call, and 2,000 people, about 100 people went forward. And then he said, there's one more person that wants to come forward. And nobody went forward. And I started to think, yeah, I think it's me. And then he says from the front, you know who you are. I said, yeah, but I can't do this. He says, you can do this. I thought, is he reading my mind? And all of a sudden he says, I'm not a mind reader, but I'm just saying what God tells me to say. And this went back and forth for a while, and nobody went up. And then finally said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not doing this. And I felt that force again. I said, oh, I want to do this. Well, by the time I wrestled to do it, I stood as he said, everybody be seated. And I'm the only one standing. And I could just feel everybody looking at the one guy standing. And then he said something. He said, bring him down. Bring him down here. It took 6 people to get me to the front. All of a sudden, I was praying with him in a chair, and I felt again this rush and this flush of electricity. So I knew it wasn't a man. I knew there was something there. There were no wires. There was nothing. I knew something supernatural had happened. And when I looked around the room, I thought they whitewashed the place. I thought, who painted the building? I mean, it just seemed different. It was as if the scales of my eyes were removed, and everything looked different. I didn't understand it, but I couldn't deny it. A couple of days later, I was on the phone with my mom. And in the conversation, she said, Jan, you sound so happy. You sound so at peace. What is different? She said, well, what is it? Maybe I can do it. I said, well, I wish you would, but I don't think you want to know this. She had scheduled for me to see rabbis. She had scheduled for me, I'd say 5 different rabbis, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. She had the whole thing set up for me. People ask me, how can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus? You can't be Jewish and believe in Jesus. And I asked them a question. I said, who told you that? They said, everybody knows that. I said, okay, everybody knows, but how do you know it? Have you ever studied it? No. Have you ever looked at it? No. Have you ever evaluated to challenge it? No. And then they tell me, by the way, you're brainwashed. You believe whatever you're told. You can't think for yourself. So I continue to ask them, how do you know? And then finally it comes down to them saying, if he was really the Messiah, the rabbis would tell us. I said, so you know it because the rabbis told you? Yes. I said, so you never studied it, you never looked at it, you never evaluated it, you never had any cost involved, but the rabbis told you and you believe it. Who's brainwashed?
I just can't fathom leaving my friends, my family. I'm gonna get ostracized. They're gonna think I'm crazy, and I'm probably gonna lose my entire social network if I make this sort of decision. I think Judaism today is different than the way God wants Judaism to be. I don't think God wants us to be satisfied just with tradition and just with ritual. I don't think traditions in and of themselves are evil or bad, but I think God wants something much more than that with us. He wants our hearts and he wants us to have a close relationship with him. One day I was sitting at a restaurant eating by myself, and a stranger came down and sat across from me and just started going on and on and on about Jesus for like 15 minutes. I sat there silently thinking, this guy's nuts, but what am I going to do? So at the end of the conversation, he says, so what do you think about all this? And I said, well, honestly, I'm Jewish. I don't really have much to say. And he got so excited. He was just thrilled that I was Jewish, and that he told me that he loved the Jewish people and that he loved Israel. And he was just, his eyes lit up. He was ecstatic. And I said, wait, why are you so excited that I'm Jewish? I thought the more Christian you are, the more you dislike Jews. But he said, no, man. He's like, if a Christian knows the Bible, they love the Jewish people. The summer of my sophomore year, I was invited, or I should say recruited, to do a crazy summer job, selling books door to door. Sounds nuts. This little Jewish boy selling books door to door. It got even crazier. They were sending me off to the Bible Belt to do it. The summer became more interesting. When we got to Henderson, North Carolina, we had to knock on doors to find a place to live for the summer. We weren't going to stay in a hotel because we're trying to keep our expenses down. There were 4 of us actually, and we ended up, having to knock on all the doors in this town, trying to find a family crazy enough to put up, a couple of college kids for the summer. We ended up finding one family that thought we're crazy. Really remarkable family. They had 3 kids, and they rearranged their entire household to bring in these college kids to sleep in their home. Very, very hospitable. So that first night, staying with them, the father who took us in, he asked me to step into the kitchen. He wanted to talk to me for a few minutes. So of course, this guy is showing me hospitality. I said, whatever you want, I'll be happy to talk. And he starts telling me the story about how he met Jesus and about how he became, how he got delivered from cocaine addiction, and how when he invited Jesus into his life, the room shook. And he was just telling me this crazy story. I'm like, what is going on here? So I called my mom that night. I'm like, Mom, I found an amazing family. They're letting us stay with them, but he's telling me about Jesus. Mom's like, don't listen to that guy. He's nuts. Just be happy he took you in, but don't pay too much attention to what he's saying. So I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. So the summer goes on, and obviously I'm knocking on doors, knocking on, hundreds and hundreds of doors. And it seemed like almost every day I was running into people that were very, very excited about Jesus and talking about God all the time. And I knocked on a door, and a guy answered the door and said, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" And I said, "No, I'm Jewish." And he said, "So that doesn't matter. Everyone needs to know Jesus." I'm like, "I don't think so. That's not what I've been taught." It was almost like I was being bombarded by the gospel. Of course, I was in the Bible Belt, so I shouldn't have been too surprised by that. But I had never really been presented with who Jesus was and why a Jew would even need to consider who he was. And these people obviously strongly believed what they were believing in. They were very sincere, very loving, very kind people. And quite honestly, I was a little bit jealous of their sincerity and of the obvious closeness that they had with God. So as a Jew, I'm like, wait a minute, this is something that I'm supposed to have. You know, I'm a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I mean, I'm supposed to have the direct connection with God, right? But yet these Gentile Christians seem to be closer to my God than I am. So one night in bed, before I was going to sleep, I actually was crying to God about this. I actually had tears, and I literally cried out to God, and I said, "God, is Jesus the Messiah? And is this something that I need to make a decision about? I know that if I go and talk to a rabbi, he's going to tell me, no, he's not the Messiah. And if I go and talk to a priest or pastor, he's going to tell me something else." So I said to God, God, you need to show me what the truth is here, because I know that man's going to have their own opinions. And I can't say that a lightning struck or that I saw a vision at that moment, but something changed in my heart from that point forward. I went from being angry and annoyed when I ran into these Christians to actually being interested to hear more about who this Jesus guy really was. Anyway, the summer continued. I had a great time selling books, worked really hard, made a lot of money, ended up going back to campus, and my grades were still good. I still was having fun. I bought a new car, put in a car stereo system. I really had everything that I wanted as a college kid. But I began to realize that I still had that emptiness in my heart. The money didn't really make me any happier. The new car didn't make me any happier. The booming car stereo didn't make me any happier. Partying didn't make me happier. And I just began to reflect on what I had experienced during the summer. It all kind of came to a head during finals week. I was walking to the library, and on the way to the library, I took a little detour because I saw a crowd of people. And as the crowd kind of got out of the way, the banner said, "Are you going to heaven? 2-question test reveals the answer." And I said, oh my gosh. It was almost like the whole summer and that semester kind of led up to that point, that pinnacle. God had answered my prayer, and it had changed my heart, and had sent all these people to continue talking to me about Jesus. And here it was laid out in front of me. It was almost like God gave me, this was like my final exam. Am I going to accept him or not? He said, well, Matt, you need to make a decision. Do you want to please God, or do you want to please man? A lot of Jews, myself included, think that once you believe in Yeshua, that you're turning your back on your heritage. I didn't want to betray my people in any way. My Jewishness was very important to me. And, when I realized that as a follower of Yeshua, as a believer in him, that it's not a betrayal of our heritage. In fact, it's a fulfillment of it. I remember reading when, Yeshua said that he did not come to abolish the Torah or the Haftorah, but to fulfill it. I was very excited when I read that, because I realized, wait a minute, I can believe in Yeshua and not abandon my Jewishness. In fact, it's the most Jewish thing I could possibly do. What could be more Jewish than a Jew believing in the Jewish Messiah?
One of my last major assignments was to do the identification of the victims from 9/11. Seeing people who had been killed in terrible, terrible ways gave me the feeling that there were real evil in the world. No human being could be this evil just by themselves. I was born and raised in the Bronx in New York City. Like any other good Jewish boy, I would go to Hebrew school. We were leaving school at 3 o'clock, and we just happened to run into these Catholic schoolgirls. They just started berating us, calling us names, and punching some of the other boys. And they were calling us Christ killers. The only Christians I imagined were Catholics. I knew the Catholics knew the New Testament, that was their Bible, and I just felt that this was a very anti-Semitic book, that this had nothing to do with Judaism. If anything, it had to do with beating up the Jews or getting the Jews. That was my understanding as a young child growing up in the Bronx. I studied dentistry at NYU. After graduating, I became associated with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City, and I learned about forensic medicine and forensic dentistry. I had 4 shields as the Chief Dental Consultant for the City of New York, which is a very, very high Chief of Detective shield. The tragedy of 9/11 reminded me of what it was to work in the medical examiner's office. The real personification of evil existed in that office. It was terrible. But I knew the corollary was true, that there was this good part that would be opposing evil, and that, of course, is God. One day, of all things, I have a patient, and she was so sweet and so nice. We just hit it off right away. Maybe we should get married and have a nice religious ceremony. And my wife had been brought up Catholic. I was at a loss at who was going to perform the ceremony. And my friend said, there's this church on the Upper West Side, and the associate rector is named Steve Pogoloff. Steve Pogoloff, that doesn't sound like a very Episcopalian name. Obviously, Pogoloff was also Jewish. One day in the church, they announced that there was going to be a series, an evening series, of the Jewish perspective of Jesus, given by a Jewish person who believes in Jesus. It was so intriguing, the title and what he was going to speak about, that we said, I really like to go and listen to him, and I did. So I went that first night, and the guest lecturer for that night for the next 2 weeks was Bob Mendelsohn. I said, you mean to tell me, Bob, since I'm a Jew, and I'm a pretty good Jew, I don't even cheat on my income taxes, and I can say that with a straight face, and I could do all these things, you're telling me that unless I believe in this person, Jesus, that I will not go to heaven? Yep, you're not going to go. You have to believe there's only one way, and that way is through Jesus Christ. I mean, what chutzpah, what nerve to say that to somebody and to believe that? It's just unbelievable. Well, when I first started reading the New Testament, with the expectation that I was going to be reading this real anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish book, it was just the opposite. I said, how could anybody say this is an anti-Semitic book? It's a very, very Jewish book. All the apostles, who I thought were Catholic, obviously they were not, were all Jewish boys. They were just like me. I was shocked. The scripture only points to one man, and it points to Jesus. I said, this resurrection is true. With all the archaeology and all the technology and everything that we have, nobody's ever come forward with any evidence that there was a body and the body was found. Very, very, very difficult to get rid of a body. Well, if the resurrection is true, well, then everything he said has to be true. I couldn't get away from that fact that therefore this indeed was the Messiah that had been promised and is promised to the Jews. And I believed it, and I believed he was the Messiah, and I let him into my life, and I let him lead me, and I try to, as best I can, as a human being, to follow him. It's always a struggle, but I try to do what I know that Christ would want me to do and what I should be doing. Many people don't like the truth, and they want to keep the status quo that they know and prevent the truth from coming in and disrupting their way of life. There's no question that there was a change in me. I did have a tendency to curse and get angry. My children are 26 years old, and they never heard me curse. Never heard me curse. Jesus is my Lord and my Messiah.
Hello people, I'm here today to tell you the truth about what I saw. Hell is real. That's the main thing I want to tell you. It's a real place. I don't think it's that far, and it's absolutely real. And I'm absolutely terrified to end up there. It's very difficult for me to make this video because it just brings really bad memories from that place. It all started about 2 months ago. I had a very sharp pain in my heart, and I couldn't breathe or move. I don't know whether that's related to it somehow, but the same night I went to sleep and I woke up in hell. I was above all the mountains, the loads of mountains. It's like it's all mountains, and I saw no beginning, no end of the place. And I wasn't scared at first. I was just looking at it and I was so surprised, and I was thinking, wow, it really exists, the place is real. And I always had some doubts about it. You know, we all Christians will say hell exists, heaven exists. But I always had this tiny doubt, you know, that you don't say to anyone or you don't talk about it. You just have this thing inside you. And here I was genuinely surprised, and I thought, oh, I need to tell everyone. It's actually real. It's real. And then I went down, and that was the worst part. Seeing it from above, it's not so bad. I have to mention it was dark. There was a bit of a red light, and it was dark. And then I went down. I could fly. I could actually fly. And I was stuck near the mountain. I was just where the top was. I was just there. I couldn't see anything down what was below. There was, I don't know whether there was some sort of fog, or I couldn't see what was at the bottom. I could just see the top of the mountains. So the thing about the place is I don't have words to describe it, because it's not human. It's a spiritual place. So I was just thinking, when I actually woke up after this, I was thinking, how do I explain this? Because there are no words. I don't think humans have any words for that place. All I can say is I was in shock. I was in agony. You have this feeling of pain. The pain is inside you, but I just can't describe it. I don't know. How do I say it? The only example I can give is, imagine you have a dream, like the worst nightmare in your life, the worst nightmare you have. That's about 100 times worse. The fear, the panic, the shock, and you look around, and you know you're not the only one there, but this shock was, you know, you're scared, you know you're in hell. There's no need someone to tell you you're in hell. You know it's a hell. And there's no tiny thing of no happiness. There's no, like, here we can make cup of tea, cup of coffee, or we're happy, there's something cheerful, or we can do that. There's nothing. There's just horror, an absolute horror. I was in this, probably I was a few minutes in this condition where I had this inside pain and panic. And then my relative came. That was I don't know who it was, to be honest, because my memory was wiped. I don't know who it was. And he was in shock, just like me. He just got there and he started looking around in this darkness, but you could still see everything. And he realized, he knew straight away where he was. And I just said to him, just don't curse God, don't curse him, I'll pray for you. But I don't think he even heard me, or he was just in total shock. And I think I had this idea of hell. I heard people's stories about it, but I didn't think it was that bad. I don't think I could stay any longer there because my heart was going to explode. You know, like, you just can't take anymore. It's just that bad. And the fear is so great. And I sort of expected someone, but I'm not sure who it was or what I was supposed to see there. And then I woke up. It was exactly 12 o'clock. And I woke up and I just thought, I can't believe I just been in hell. I just saw the hell, and I just can't go to sleep back again because I'm worried I'll end up there again. So I just kept crying, maybe till 6 o'clock in the morning. I just kept crying and praying to God, please don't send me there. And I was thinking about it after that, and I'm sure it was just a small part what I saw. It's just a small part of a very big place. And I saw lots of other things. There were so many memories I don't know whether they were the demons I saw, but all my memory was wiped. I just woke up, and the second I woke up, I couldn't remember anything of that. I could remember this atmosphere of, like, you know, you just can't do anything. There's no hope, there's no love, there's no one. You're just alone in this horrible place. And I was thinking in hell. I was thinking, I would give anything. I would give my house, I would give my car, I would give anything. I just can't believe I'm here. I would give anything to get out of here, but I couldn't. You just can't go anywhere. You don't have any physical power. Like, we rely here on our physical power. We can do that, we can do other things. You can't do anything there. So I think lots of people talk about different experiences in hell. And I saw this part of hell. Other people saw maybe the lowest part, where maybe the biggest criminals and people like Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, maybe they're on the bottom bit. All I know is I saw that place, and it's real. And it will stay with me forever. Every day I wake up now and I know the place is real. I had 3 weeks of panic attacks after this incident. I had difficulties breathing. I just couldn't breathe well. I was in depression because I didn't expect to end up there. I didn't think I was a bad person. I used to think I'm a good person. I used to think I'm satisfied with myself. I'm doing my bit for charity. I'm going to church. I'm maybe better than some other people, like criminals, because I don't have maybe as bad sins as them. That's what I used to think before that happened to me. But anyway, the panic attacks are over now. All this, I've got the memory obviously, but the worst part is over. It's just getting over when you think about it every day, and it's hard because you remember every detail. So I used to think, yes, I was a good person, and after what happened, I realized I'm not better than others. I just have my sins. Other people have their sins. Our weak places, really. It's just everyone's got a weak place. But all I can tell you is just we shouldn't think that we're very good or we're doing enough. We should never think we're good enough or we're doing that much. We should never be that satisfied with ourselves, that happy with ourselves. And I just want you to know the place is real. It's real, and it's not someone's fantasy. It's not written in the Bible so to scare people so they don't do bad things. I'll do anything now. I'll just do anything, just not to end up there. I'll do my bit of fasting. I wouldn't be as attached to money, maybe as I used to be. And nothing in this life is important. No money, no properties, nothing is important. It's just the most important thing is not to end up there. And I can tell you, it's just not worth it. No money are worth it. Nothing is worth it just to end up there. Or you might have a good lifestyle here, and it's just not worth it to end up there. This is just the worst place you could imagine. It's so many times worse than you could think of. And the problem is I can't even describe it because it's all spiritual. But I hope you got some idea of this place. God bless you, and I hope you learn from my experience and you change your lifestyle, whoever is doing something wrong. Thank you for watching my video.
Well, what a blessing it has been to hear these folks testify of what Jesus Christ has done in their life and what he means to them. I pray, my friend, that if you have not made a commitment to this one called Jesus Christ, that this would be the turning point in your life. This would be the moment in time when you say, you know what? I need to have Jesus Christ as the center of my life. Let me make it easy for you. Let me pray a little prayer, a simple prayer that you can follow along if you want. Some people struggle with words. Let me make it easy for you. Just in your own way, pray this prayer along with me. Lord Jesus, I admit to you that I'm self-willed. I admit to you that I've wanted to run my life the way I've wanted to run it. And I haven't been all that concerned about what you think about it. But I want that to change. I'm asking forgiveness for all of the self-will actions that I have executed in times past. The Bible calls that sin. I ask forgiveness for all of my sins. I receive forgiveness because you promise that you forgive me when I ask. I ask that you fill me with the Holy Spirit so that I can walk now in greater power, the power of God, to say no to temptations when they hit me. And then give me the wisdom, Lord, if I do fall into sin, to quickly ask forgiveness, ask you for help in not committing that sin over and over. And that, Father, I want to live right for you from this moment forward. So that when I die, I'll go and be in heaven with you for eternity. Thank you for your salvation, Jesus. My friend, it's as simple as that. Go with Jesus. It'll be the wisest decision you've ever made.